So now let us continue in our study of this Gongchik. So yesterday we covered statement 11. Statement 11, which essentially what you see there is Kyoba, a recurring theme of Kyoba Rinpoche's way of understanding the diversity of the Buddhist teachings. So whereas like there has been lots of debates in late Indian Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism in the beginning period, as to the relationship between these two branches, often conceived as two branches of the Mahayana philosophical traditions, which is the mind-only or the Chittamatra branch, and the Madhyamaka or the middle way branch. So in late Indian Buddhism, in the Nalanda tradition, Nalanda being one of the greatest universities that ever existed, and certainly a very important institution in the history of India. In Nalanda, they eventually came up with this kind of a general summary and say that all of Indian Buddhist traditions, all the different philosophical traditions of Indian Buddhism, which historically developed independent, or more or less independent of each other, as in like we have this way of looking at things because we don't agree with your way of looking at things. So as many as 18 different traditions and even more. But eventually in late Indian Buddhism, they basically at Nalanda emphasized that all of them can be grouped into 4 philosophical traditions. So in terms of philosophy, they say there are 4. 2 belonging to what is termed as lesser vehicle, and 2 belonging to what is known as the greater vehicle. So the lesser vehicle are the Vaibhashikas and the followers of sutras. Vaibhashikas, particularists, and follower of sutras. Those are 2 groups, 2 branches. Then under the Mahayana branch, there is the Chittamatra, the mind-only branch, and the middle way branch. Now again here, historically, the middle way branch, you could say, existed first. Often it is Nagarjuna is identified as the one who began, who started the middle way philosophical tradition. Then later, Asanga is identified as the originator of the mind-only, the Chittamatra. And then furthermore, they will say that Nagarjuna was inspired by Manjushri, and Asanga was inspired by Maitreya, and Manjushri and Maitreya, respectively. In the course of these debates, these 4 philosophical traditions have been arranged in such a way that they understand it as from the most, the least profound position to the most profound position. So then beginning with the particularists, then the followers of Sutra, then the mind only, and then the middle way. Now, of course, I'm sure, historically again, not ideologically, but historically, there were people who were followers of these different branches. So I'm sure those followers of the branch of the particularists will not say, "Oh, we are the lowest," and there are three more, more profound than us. They, the actual followers of the particularists, they must have felt, no, ours is the most legitimate, ours is the most faithful to the Buddha's teachings, and ours is the most profound. Likewise, the followers of Sutra, this particular group, they will say, oh, no, ours is the most profound, and so on and so forth. The particular followers during their lifetimes, they didn't think, we are second most profound, or we are, the fourth most profound. Yeah. So this is obviously an arrangement that those who belong to the middle way tradition is their way of harmonizing, so to say, all the different positions, giving a place for the other systems, and coming up with a comprehensive, cohesive understanding. So these debates continue, from India into Tibet. And so in the time of Gyalpa Rinpoche, in the 10th, 11th century, or rather, 11th, 12th century, these debates continue even in Tibet and never quite settle, which is which. So this statement 11 here is unusual in the sense that whereas most Tibetans who debate these issues would consider mind only, Chittamatra, and middle way as two separate branches, and then furthermore with Chittamatra or mind only being inferior to middle way, here Gyalpa says, actually the teachings of mind only and the teachings of middle way, they constitute the same tradition. That in fact, a proper understanding of the mind only teachings, which says that everything is mind, a proper understanding of that position necessarily takes into consideration, accepts the middle way position, that all phenomena are without essence, including this mind is also without essence, free from elaborations, free from the two extremes of existing or not existing. The practical implications of this is that later on, or in other contexts, when we look at, for example, Mahamudra teachings, where again there's a lot of emphasis on mind. In Mahamudra practice, there's a lot of emphasis on mind, nature of mind. Then often when we come across these teachings on the nature of mind, sometimes if we are not careful, we the readers, we the students, we the listeners, if we're not careful, we might think that this nature of mind has some kind of essence, some kind of fixity. And those who teach this, those who teach nature of mind, those who write about it, those who talk about it, also the teachers, right? Whether formally or informally. If they are not careful, in the language that they use, they might also inadvertently reinforce our mistaken habits of wanting to find a self where no self can be found. And so we need to kind of be aware, be alert to this. How easily these teachings on mind, nature of mind, can slip into essentializing what is fundamentally without essence, without fixity. Fundamentally, right, all the dharmas taught by the Buddha was taught by the Buddha for us to de-identify, to not latch on to anything, not the physical aggregates, not the mental emotional aggregates, not the elements, nor the objects of perception, nor mind, none of it, none of what we know within this context of, confused existence, none of this can serve as a basis, is a reliable basis for imputing self. So fundamentally, it takes us back to not self. This is not self, 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 this is not self. And then later, again, like in Mahamudra sometimes, and in Dzogchen too, a teacher might say, oh, this is mind, this is mind, and this is also mind, this is also mind, and this is mind, and this is mind, this is also mind, this is mind. As in the mind, right? Again, sometimes if we're not careful, we might think this mind is a thing, and oh, that's my true self. But remember, these mind-only instructions has to be based on a more basic understanding, which is everything is without essence, and this mind too is free from the extremes of existing or not existing, of is and is not. So this aspect is important. I'm not saying that the classical tradition, the classical tradition of mind-only Chittamatra is identical with Mahamudra. And there's a lot of nuances there that can set them slightly apart. But it is accurate to say a lot of the language used in Mahamudra instructions, in Dzogchen instructions, are heavily influenced by this Chittamatra style of talking. And just as well, also influenced by the middle way style of talking as well. Basically, those two combined together is the Mahamudra tradition. And that's why here in statement 11, essentially Kyoba is saying, these two are not two separate branches. They both are equally weighty in informing our final understanding of what is this. And therefore, what we habituate, what we train with regards to what is the reality about this? What is the reality about this. That reality has to be understood with the help of both mind only as well as middle way. In fact, I'm sure Kyopa will also say, including the way of the followers of Sutra and the way of the particularists, because each of those positions, now this is how Kyopa harmonizes them. Kyopa will say that each of those positions represented by those branches of Indian Buddhism, they were not just the product of Buddhist disciples after the Buddha's death over time, disagreeing with each other. This will be Kyopa's kind of take on how these different positions arose. He would say, no, this is not because people they came about because people were arguing with each other, and so then they created these things. He would say that all these positions are grounded in Buddha's skillful way of teaching the Dharma and revealing the Dharma to different individuals, and therefore the respective positions found in these particular branches, they came ultimately from the Buddha's skillful teaching of the disciples, revealing the 84,000 aspects of the single Dharma. So now statement 12. Statement 12, this Vajra statement, is the mistaken relative reality is also able to perform a function. The mistaken relative reality, so you could also translate it as mistaken relative truth, relative reality. This translator translates satya in Sanskrit as reality, but more commonly is translated as truth, as in the two truths. Mistaken relative truth is also able to perform a function. Now, this function need not be a positive function, and also not limited to negative function. It's simply saying that it has power to create results, even mistaken relative truth. So to give a little bit of background here, so this statement is in the area of discussing what is known as the two truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. So this vocabulary, this pair, this concept of the two truths, again goes all the way back to Buddha's instructions to his disciples. And when you read through the different sutras, you read through the Abhidharma, it won't take long for you to either come across this expression of the two truths, or explicitly or implicitly, you will understand that fundamentally the Buddha taught that there are two aspects, you could say, two aspects to truth, to reality. There is what appears to be, and then there is what truly is. So the most basic way of talking about the two truths would be this. Now, however, when you apply these two truths, or when you ask those, for example, 4 different philosophical traditions, hey, can you tell me what are the two truths? If you ask the particularists, they will tell you, well, the two truths is like this. And if you ask the followers of sutras, so what are the two truths? Then they'll tell you, well, the two truths are like this. And then they will also tell you, obviously, here are the two truths, and here are how the two truths are related. And so in each of those 4, they have a different, slightly different way of explaining to you what the two truths are and how the two truths are related. So in fact, there is a book that was published many years ago from a graduate student. I mean, he wrote his dissertation on the two truths under the supervision guidance of Jeffrey Hopkins, also one of my teachers. But this person, graduated from the program years before I did. I think the book is still in print. It was a Snow Lion book. It's simply called The Two Truths. And there they go through the four philosophical traditions and how each of them would talk about the two truths. Now, as a footnote, as it turns out, this is only the interpretation of the Gelugpa tradition. The Gelugpa tradition says, the particularists, this is how they talk about the two truths. The followers of Sutra, this is how they talk about the two truths. There are other positions in the Tibetan intellectual context. They will say, no. Actually, the particularists, they talk about the two truths in this way and not that way. And then if you can go back in time, and interview a particularist, don't be so surprised if they say, actually, we don't look at the two truths in any of these ways. Yeah. So anyway, so this statement has to do with this issue of the two truths. Now, generally, I think when it comes to the two truths, this is my observation, insofar as what is the ultimate truth, usually the debates and the discussions there, not very interesting, if you ask me, to me. Because they all will use terms like, it is beyond concept. It is free from the extremes, things like that. And you're like, okay, yeah, whatever, right? Because in some ways, it's pointing to the ineffable, right? I think all four traditions will say, oh yeah, of course, the final reality is ineffable, cannot be expressed. So they use statements like this, expressions like this. Then, yeah, what is there to talk about? So usually the debate is not, exactly what the ultimate truth is. Usually the more interesting debate is, what is the status of this thing that you call relative truth? In fact, one position regarding the relative truth is that it is completely fictitious. Yeah, there is absolutely not a speck of dust of reality to relative truth. Completely fictitious. Then some would say, wait, if it is completely fictitious, why even use the word truth? Relative truth. Then, those who say that it is completely fictitious have to try to defend that. So one defense would be, well, the Buddha is speaking in such a way to connect with or to explain it in terms that his audience understood. So what he's saying is his audience thinks that it is truth. And so to that degree, he goes along. But he goes along only to show them that it is actually completely fictitious. It's complete fiction. At some point when you read about this, you come maybe to, you have a question that arises, it's like, so is truth stranger than fiction? Because sometimes these debates, can get so, for us at least, so convoluted, that we feel like, gosh, if this is the truth, it sure is stranger than fiction, So here, coming closer to statement 12, there is a position that says that, furthermore, and so this position is not like the one I just mentioned, which is If it is relative truth, it's completely fiction. It's completely fictitious. Here, it's more nuanced. This is addressing a position that is more nuanced than just relative truth is completely fictitious. This is addressing a position that says, when we look at relative truth, there is mistaken relative truth and relative truth that is not mistaken. Mistaken relative truth, completely fictitious. Relative truth that is not mistaken have some degree of truth to them. So, completely mistaken relative truth, what would that be? It would be seeing the reflection, and this is a classic example, seeing the reflection of the moon inside, at the bottom of an open well. When we talk about well in the Buddhist context, we're not talking about these modern wells, where you have a pipe, you dig in 300 feet, 400 feet, and it's covered over, you use a pump to pump out. They're talking about these big wells with an opening, and you can look in. Seeing a moon inside, in the water at the bottom of a well, and mistaking that and thinking that, oh my gosh, the moon has fallen down to the well. That, they say, is a mistaken relative truth. In relation to that, the moon that is shining up in the sky, that is relative truth, stands without mistake. That's relative truth without mistake. The moon that is still in the sky. The moon that you see in the well, and you don't think that, you don't understand that, this is a reflection of that. You see in the well, you go, oh no, the moon, there's a second moon in there. That perception of a second moon, that perception of the moon has fallen into the well and need rescuing, that's a mistaken relative truth. So here, statement 12, Khenpo says, now, furthermore, in that understanding, the opinion which this statement corrects or opposes is, if it is a mistaken relative truth, it has no ability to affect anything, to cause anything. It has no power to be a cause for anything. Here, Khenpo says, no, even mistaken relative truth can perform functions, can produce consequences. So, Khenpo Kunpal's commentary on this, which is on page 112, if you happen to have the book. Mistaken relative truth, such as the moon's reflection in water, other reflections, and so forth, which are empty upon analysis, which are dependently arisen, and thereby congruently perceive, is also able to perform a function for the respective perceiver. This is, for example, like the 500 suns of the queen, Mriga Ramata. And so here again, mistaken relative truths, such as the moon's reflections and so on, although they are empty upon analysis, meaning they have no essence, that they are dependently arisen, and therefore perceive accordingly, congruently to the perceivers. They are, in fact, able to perform a function. Able to perform a function for whom? For the respective perceiver. Now here we are provided a footnote by the translator. She says, in contrast to the general understanding of mistaken relative truth as that which is not what it appears to be, such as a reflection of the moon in water, Jigten Sungun maintains that it refers to all afflictions causing non-virtuous actions that lead to suffering, and that the authentic relative reality is all virtuous activities leading to happiness. So this is a further nuance. This is a further nuance here. So that again, the general explanation is like the moon and the water and things like that. So here, wait, let's go to the example given by Khenpo Kunpal in 166. So here the footnote says, the 500 princes enjoyed themselves in the park, and when they saw their own reflections in the lake, they realized that all phenomena are illusory and insubstantial, like the reflections in the water. And then in this way, they woke up from their kind of confused experience of enjoyment. And so this is a case of how reflections in the water, though they are mistaken relative truth, they can perform a function, the function of waking up these 500 princes. Although here I would say, if the princes can see that the reflection in the water, now here, okay, never mind, I take that back. When they saw their own reflection in the water, obviously they are not like, there's another story which is the monkeys. When the monkeys saw the moon in the well, they did not think, this is just a reflection. They thought the moon has fallen into the well. Then they all started to panic, and they all tried to rescue the moon from the well. In the case of the princes, they saw their own reflection in the water. They didn't make the mistake of, oh my God, I have fallen in the water. Right? They saw that, and they saw the illusory nature of their reflection, which then made them think about, hey, how about this? Is this more real? This body here, how more real is this than this reflection that we're seeing in the water? Then they deeply realize, actually, this reality is maybe only slightly more reliable than that reflection in the water. Then they woke up. So that is given here by Khenpo Kunpal as a case of how mistaken relative truth, meaning unreal relative truth, still can perform a function. The classic example given in the older commentaries about mistaken relative truth can have consequences is again that story of those monkeys. So then the monkeys started to panic, and they said, oh, we have to rescue the moon from the well. So then they said, how do we do this? Then they said, well, we don't have a rope to lower one of us down there to pick up the moon. So then one monkey said, well, maybe we can form a monkey chain. One holding the other's hand, and then slowly, climb down to the well, all holding hands. Then the last one at the end of that will scoop up the moon. So as they all did that, something happened, and somebody up there released their hand, and they all fell into the well and drowned. Kind of a violent story. A tragic, violent story. They all drowned and died. So that is another example of how mistaken relative truth can have terrible consequences. So here in this footnote that the author, the earlier footnote that the author, the translator gives, this is kind of like maybe our take-home lesson here. So is Gyalpa Rinpoche that concerned about monkeys and moons and princes and reflections in the water? Actually, no, right? In the end, he's not interested in metaphysical questions. In the end, what he's most interested in, he says, cause and effect, karma. He says, although you can understand relative truth and mistaken and unmistaken relative truths in all sorts of different ways, the most important way to understand what relative truth is referring to is that it's referring to the principle, the law of, or the natural functioning of causality, cause and effect. So in this context, if we understand that fundamentally, the main meaning of relative truth is referring to cause and effect, then unmistaken relative truth is clear understanding of cause and effect, at least in its general principles. Virtuous causes lead to, skillful virtuous causes lead to happiness, unskillful non-virtuous causes lead to suffering. At least the general principle. When we're able to see that and we live according to that way, that is called relative truth without mistakes. What is relative truth with mistakes? Not understanding the law of causality, and then therefore living a life that is blind to the law of causality. And not only blind to, in fact, actively subverting, actively acting against this principle. When we want happiness, instead we go create suffering. When we don't want suffering, instead we go creating the causes of suffering. When we do that, that is called mistaken relative truth, mistaken relative reality. So this is Gyalpa Rinpoche's main way of explaining what is relative truth. Elsewhere, Pema Karpo, another great, this is a great kind of Kagyu philosopher, monk, Pema Karpo, from the Drupa Kagyu lineage. A friend who has been studying Pema Karpo's writings said, for Pema Karpo, he explains that he uses this relative truth, mistaken, unmistaken, in the context of deity yoga practice. Yeah, he says that mistaken relative truth is our perception of the world as we perceive it right now. You and me. Then unmistaken relative truth is the perception of yogis practicing deity yoga, where this universe, this environment is the perfect mandala of Buddhas, and all the inhabitants are Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and deities. That is unmistaken relative truth. But in Khenpo, he says, apply this mainly to this issue of the law of causality. Yes, Judy.
I guess you kind of explained it, but I certainly understand how mistaken reality can lead to consequences that are not good or negative. But if in the case of the prince is looking in the reflection and seeing, how is that unmistaken? Is that not?
No, that's mistaken.
How is that mistaken?
It's mistaken because the reflections are not real.
But they know that. So is that not unmistaken?
They know that, but they are not, see, yeah. So at first I was going to say that is unmistaken. But you see, the difference here is that monkeys see the moon, right? And they think the moon has fallen. So then they got into a course of action. Princes, when they look at it, they understood that, oh, this is a metaphor. This is an example of how fleeting this is. So it's not mistaken. They did not think, oh, we fell in there. Now we need to come out of the water before we drown.
Right, I understand. I guess.
Yeah. So if they see that, right?
It's unmistaken.
Yeah. If they see that and they thought I have fallen in, right?
Mistaken.
That will be definitely mistaken.
Right.
In this case, it's mistaken in the sense that that is not real.
So it's not about their.
Yeah, it's not about their perception in the example given by Khenpo Kunpal.
Okay, well, I'm still not really understanding that, but
it doesn't matter. You get the point.
Word for it.
You know,
they were mistaken.
The point of what Khenpo Kunpal's example is about, right? And so for Khenpo Kunpal, right, he's saying that there is an example of how a mistaken event led to something positive. Yeah? So in that moment when the prince first looked into the water, right? Perhaps they were having a good time. Perhaps maybe even they were impaired, maybe with alcohol, right? At least for an instant, right? They took seriously, oh, that's us.
So it's not just about perception. It's more than that. It's the fact of what it is that they are perceiving being not real.
Yes. But that also led to at least a moment of thinking serious enough that, oh, that's me. Right? Maybe in the next moment, oh, wait, of course not. I'm up here, I'm dry, not wet,
Okay.
But there is a moment of mistaken perception as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so here again, right? The take home, right, is that when Khenpo talks about relative truth, Khenpo is talking about, in his mind, he says, when Buddha talks about relative truth, he's talking about cause and effect. And when it comes to cause and effect, both getting, accepting, and therefore organizing our lives according to the principle of cause and effect, which he calls this unmistaken relative truth, and not getting, not accepting, not seeing, and therefore not arranging our lives according to the principle of causality, both have consequences. And in fact, the second case, those consequences are way more dangerous. Whereas the first one is, well, not dangerous at all. That one is the key to both temporary and ultimate happiness. Seeing relative truth correctly rather than incorrectly. Yeah, so today we stop here.